Hello everyone and welcome to DIY Projects with Pete, Episode 3, Part 1. Today we'll be building a farmhouse style coffee table out of pine. Tools needed will be an orbital sander, drill, circular saw, miter saw, Kreg Jig, and sanding block. For supplies, we'll need to pick up screws, wood stain, a semi-gloss poly, along with some sandpaper. Then head over to your lumber store, pick up some 2x6s, some 2x4s, 2x2s, and lastly, some 1x12s. For the complete list of instructions, tools, supplies, and today's show notes, head over to petesven.com/farmhouse coffee table. Hi everybody, I'm Pete Sven and welcome to DIY Projects with Pete, Episode 3. In today's episode, we'll be building a rustic farm-style coffee table out of pine, and then we'll distress it. Now, it's going to have a lower shelf that you'll be able to put your magazines on, and then the top is going to be made out of 2x6s that will attach to each other. Now, as far as how tough it's going to be, I would call it a pretty beginner project. If you know me, I'm from Montana, and I love to ski, so I like to relate things to skiing. And so my different levels are green for beginner, just like a slope, blue for intermediate, and black for experts. And then I have double diamond, which is for the best of the best if you're a real good woodworker. Anyhow, we'll be using a combination of 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x2s, and 1x12s for this project. At the end, we're going to distress it to give it some neat character, and we'll do that by using chains and hammers and some other fun tools. As far as how long it's going to take, I'd say it's a good weekend project, but if you are out in the garage lot and have built quite a few things, you can probably knock it out in just a couple hours, and then you'll want to add on your finishing time for the sanding, staining, and a poly on it. So the first step we're going to do is get out our miter saw and make our cuts. Once your miter saw is all set up, go ahead and grab a pencil, tape measure, and speed square to mark all the lines for your straight cuts. Once you've made all these straight cuts, we'll move on to the angled cuts. And in one of the next steps here, I'll go ahead and show you a couple tips on how to especially get that 60-degree angle and cut that safely and easily. To cut these 60-degree angles safely, you'll want to make a jig to use on your miter saw. I basically made a triangle, made sure it was square, about the same size as this, about 12 by 12 or so. I nailed it together, and then we're going to use it as a fence to rest your piece of wood on when we make the cut. So go ahead and take your jig here, grab a clamp, clamp it to your miter saw so it's nice and secure. Then go ahead and grab your board that you need to cut at a 60-degree angle. And you can rest it now on that fence that we just made with the jig. And then you'll want to grab a C-clamp just to secure that board to the fence so that your hands don't get cut off. Tighten that up a little ways. And then you can move the angle of your saw out to 30 degrees. And that's actually going to give you your 60-degree cut since we have this jig here. Go ahead and pull down when you're ready. Loosen your clamp, and now you have your nice 60-degree angle, and you still have your fingers. Now that your boards are all cut, we are ready to assemble the farmhouse-style coffee table. First thing, let's get out our Kreg Jig and adjust it for 1.5 inches. I like to start by assembling the sides of that coffee table, and to do that, we'll grab our 2x2s along with our Kreg Jig and put pocket holes on each side. You'll want to do 2 to help with stability on each side. And once those are all drilled, we can go ahead and drill those into the 2x4s, which are on the side, using our 2.5-inch Kreg Jig screws. And just a quick note, if you have any splinters on the ends of any of those boards, you can always run an orbital sander over those to clean them up prior to drilling them into that 2x4. Now that you've finished up with the side rails and the sides of that coffee table, clean up your workspace just a bit, and then you can set up the side rails just as if you're assembling the table, and this will prepare for the next step, which will be adding those ends to the coffee table. Go ahead and grab your Kreg Jig when you're ready, and continue drilling in those holes on the 2x4s, which will be connecting those two side panels to each other. And take your time here. If you do need to do any sanding on any of the ends, if there are any splinters, go ahead and do that after you've done the pocket holes on each board. Now you can take those 2x4s that you just put the pocket holes in and assemble them to the side rails using your 2.5-inch Kreg Jig screws. Once you've done the first side, go ahead and move on to that second side. After that, we'll be grabbing the 2x2s that have been prepped, and we'll assemble those to the end as well. Grab those 2x2s we just talked about, fasten them to each side rail, and this is going to help prepare for the shelf that we'll be putting in shortly. Now we'll be assembling the lower shelf unit using pocket holes, and so we'll want to adjust our Kreg Jig by first adjusting the Kreg Jig itself, and next you'll want to grab the drill bit and adjust that collar on it so that that's set for 3/4 inch stock as well. Once that's all set up, you're ready to connect those two 1x12s to each other. So grab that 1x12, put it into your Kreg Jig, and start drilling your pocket holes about every 8 to 10 inches from each other. Once that's done, we'll grab those 2.5-inch Kreg Jig screws and attach the two to each other. Simply line up the 1x12s to each other and then grab your 1.25-inch Kreg Jig screws, fasten them together. Once that's all done, they will form your shelf for the bottom part of your coffee table. And then to attach that to the base, you'll actually want to drill pocket holes around the entire perimeter of the two 1x12s, and it should look something like this. Now we're ready to attach the shelf to the rest of the table. So we'll try and fit it in here, but it can be quite a challenge to get it in there just right. So to make it a lot easier on yourself, what we'll do is remove the two bottom side rails from the coffee table, and then we'll attach those to our shelf on a flat surface. And for this process, since we're going through that thinner wood, the 1x12s, we're going to use 1.25-inch Kreg Jig screws to attach that 1x12 to the 2x2s on each side. Grab your shelf, slide it into place, and attach it to each end using 2.5-inch Kreg Jig screws.
Reaching number 3 on the Crooked Chase countdown in just 10 weeks. That sure did from Lake Shelton.
Ask a State Farm agent today. Get to a better state. Call 1-800-STATE-FARM today.
Ladies, are any of these symptoms familiar? Weight gain, hot flashes, rapid heartbeat, night sweats? How about fatigue?
Now that the main frame of the coffee table and the shelf have been assembled, we'll flip the coffee table over and work on those cross sections on each end. All right, let's talk about one of the trickier parts of the project, and that's doing the cross beams on each end. So you have a total of 3 pieces on each end. You have one longer and 2 shorter, and when you put them together, it ends up making that nice little X, just like this. Okay, so you have a 30-degree angle on each short piece that's touching the long piece on the inner sides, and then every angle on the outside is a 60-degree angle. Okay, so the 30-degree angle is simple. You just put it against the back of your fence on your miter saw and cut that. But the 60-degree angles are a little bit tougher, and you got to make a jig to do that. Let me just show you how to measure when you're trying to make these here. You want to measure from this outside corner to this inside corner on these shorter pieces, and that needs to be 11.25 inches. On the longer ones, you want to measure again from the outside corner to this inside part, and that needs to be 22.5 inches. First, we're going to take that 60-degree longer piece that we cut and slide it into place. Once we slide that into place and it has a nice tight fit, we'll either grab a nail gun, or if you don't have a nail gun, you can just grab a hammer and some finish nails and pound those into place. It might be kind of tough to get them all the way in, whether you're hammering or using a nail gun. And if that's the case, you can grab a punch and a hammer and just punch those a little bit more into the wood. Next, grab your shorter pieces that are 11.25 inches long. They have the 30-degree angle on the inside and the 60-degree angle on the outside. Fasten those to each other. And finally, you'll grab the third piece for that cross section on each side. Fasten that in as well. And like I said, grab a punch if you need to push those nails in a little bit more. Now we get to work on the top of our coffee table. So grab those 2x6s that we cut to 41 inches in length and mark where you'd like to put each pocket hole. Do about 5 to 6 per board, and you'll do the first 2 boards on each side. Don't put any pocket holes in the center. Go ahead and start drilling those pocket holes. We'll do the first 2 boards on each side. Make sure that you don't put any pocket holes in the center board. After this is done, we can assemble the top of the coffee table using 2.5-inch pocket screws. Now, when we're assembling the top part of our coffee table, remember that we are working with everyday construction grade lumber, and so it's almost impossible to find perfectly straight boards every time. And that's okay. We can use clamps to help hold things down and even them out. And then that breadboard end on each side is really going to help straighten everything out for us. So continue to attach each using 2.5-inch pocket screws. You'll do the first side, then move on to the next. And following that, we'll level everything out and attach those breadboard ends. You'll notice I cut the 2x6 breadboard ends initially a little bit long, and that's because your tabletop is going to vary a little bit. And now is the time to trim that down so that it perfectly matches up with the width of your actual tabletop. We're now drilling the pocket holes into the breadboard ends, and we're going to use these pocket holes to attach those breadboard ends to the main part of the coffee table top. Once this is all completed, I do like to kind of clean up the edges of the main part of the table using a sander, and that just kind of removes any splinters and softens the edges up a bit. Once this is all completed, we can attach those breadboard ends using 2.5-inch Kreg Jig screws, and this should help level out the overall table in case it's not perfectly flat. Once you've done the first breadboard, move on to the second side, finish that up, and then your tabletop is complete. So you can flip it over, see how it looks. Make sure all the boards are pretty straight on there. And once that's done, we'll flip it over one more time and get ready to attach it to the table base. Grab your table base and put it onto your work area. Then slide it onto the bottom side of your tabletop. We'll then center it on that tabletop so that it's the same distance on each side from the perimeter of the outside of the tabletop to the outside of the table base. When that's all squared up and looks good, grab your 2.5-inch torque screws and simply screw those in from the bottom side through that 2x2 and into the tabletop. Go around the perimeter and put them in about every 8 to 10 inches. We've now completed the assembly of our farmhouse style coffee table. Thanks so much for watching episode 3 of DIY Projects with Pete, part 1. In part 2, I'll show you all sorts of finishing techniques, including how to sand, distress, stain, and protect that new piece of furniture. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Feel free to connect with me at facebook.com/DIY projects with Pete and find me online at petesven.com. Good luck on your projects, everybody.